Just so each of you know, I'm going to try to direct my questions to each of you in turn so that each of
Yeah.
you get to have the chance of responding last. This next question comes from supporter Sam Mascaro. He says, Jimmy, what is the most credible argument that you have heard for young Earth creationism?
Well, it's not any of the scientific ones. It would have to be Gideon's central argument that there was that there were a lot of people in the early church who thought the Earth was young, and that there are passages of Scripture that that can be read in that way, and that it's easy to read in that way. But I would say there are also passages in Scripture that can easily be read in other ways that we need to be careful about. Not just ones about the position of the earth in the universe, but other things. Like there are the passages that talk about the windows of heaven that God opens up and rain comes out of them. Well, there aren't literally windows in heaven. But there are passages that you could read, and some scholars think they should, and not conservative scholars, but I know liberal scholars who are perfectly happy to say, yeah, those windows in heaven passages, that's what they thought in ancient Israel, that there were these windows and God would open them up and pour water out. Well, there are passages that you just need to recognize are not about science. No matter how easy it is to read them in terms of a particular model, that's not what Scripture is trying to teach us. And John Paul II, among others, from the Magisterium, has ruled that we shouldn't be trying to extract scientific data from them. And so I think that ultimately the best argument for young Earth creationism ends up failing.
Gideon.
Yeah, perhaps I should respond to this by, in turn, saying what I think is the best argument for an old Earth and evolution, in fairness. So I will say I think the best argument for evolution by far is junk DNA, one of the arguments that Jimmy brought up in the debate. Because junk DNA, it seems that this is evidence of common ancestry. And from what I can tell in researching this, and unfortunately it is hard as a layperson to fully research this, a layperson in science, that is, there does seem to be within a nested hierarchy of junk DNA. But I would say, on response to that, maybe if in 100 years this still seems to be junk DNA, that would be a very, very strong case for evolution. But right now, while almost every single year we're discovering new uses of parts of the genome that we had no clue about, that continues to leave open new discoveries about it, and perhaps this isn't actually junk DNA and it has a good purpose. I also wanted to quickly respond to the windows of heaven part by just saying I think that Scripture presents stuff in the language of how people would have seen it from their perspective. Right? So it would agree that it looks like above us there's an ocean there, and it looks like at time that ocean sort of opens up and water falls through to the earth, and these are the windows of heaven. But so I would say that that's the language that Scripture presents it in, that poetic language. And I actually fully agree that that language is very poetic. But I would also say that if you were there then on the global flood, well, you would see a global flood. If you were there on the 6 days of creation, what would you see? The world being created in 6 24-hour days. You would see in all these cases like what Scripture describes. So I agree that Scripture is not trying to give a scientific account. It's very frequently poetic. But I think that the historical aspect of it can't be reduced in that same way.
Okay.
I'd actually like a chance to respond to the days of creation that Gideon just brought up. So I'm glad we agree that there are poetic, symbolic elements in the text. When it comes to the days of creation, I would agree with the Catechism in saying that they're symbolic. And I think that the author of Genesis telegraphs that to us in Genesis 1 by having the first 3 days, have a day-night cycle before the sun is created on day 4, because the ancients were just as well aware as we are that it's light from the sun that causes it to be day. And you do find multiple Christian and non-Christian authors in the patristic period wrestling with this issue. Some of them, like Augustine, conclude, well, therefore these days aren't literal sequential days. He thinks they happen all at once. Others, even if they want to defend the idea that, okay, somehow the sun was created on the fourth day, even though the day-night cycle preceded that by 3 days, they've got to come up with some kind of explanation. But they do wrestle with the issue because people were asking about this. And to my mind, the simplest explanation is the catechisms, which is these are a symbol of what the divine work was using the framework of a week. But the fact the sun is created way after the day-night cycle telegraphs the fact that this is symbolic, because they knew that it's the sun that makes it day.
Gideon, do you want to offer a short
I would
short
say,
response, and then we'll move on to the next question?
Yeah, I think first of all, I actually do agree with Jimmy that Genesis 1 is sort of maybe the weakest point of the creationist argument, as I would say. I think that Genesis 2 through 11, and that's why I really focused on this in the debate, is really the crux of it. Because I don't see how you can reconcile Genesis 2 through 11 with the standard scientific account. At that point, you're going to have to adopt these other paradigms. If you're already considered a kook by mainstream scientists for that, why are we going to try and force it and say these have to be long ages? Now, if someone wants to bring forward, hey, I actually think these were long ages, maybe the world is 10 or 20,000 years old. If they want to say it's instantaneous like Augustine, I would say, okay, but their position is probably much closer to mine than it is to Jimmy's at that point.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought about the video.